Good morning. Thank you for being with me again today. Now, we are studying some very fascinating verses from Philippians chapter 2. And today we're looking at just two verses, verses 7 of 8 of chapter 2. And just to get the sense, we'll look at verse 6 that we shared yesterday. Jesus Christ, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being found in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Now, I think you really have to get ready for this. It really comes back to the incarnation, to the Christmas story in the first line, but made himself nothing. To get the total impact of that statement, we have to see the verse we saw yesterday. Jesus, being in the very form of God, the nature of God, Jesus Christ was God. But what did he do? He changed all that for 33 years to a point, and he made himself nothing. I don't know if we can really ever appreciate this, or whether we just have to take a long look from a long way off. But can you imagine Jesus Christ leaving the glory of the Father, the glory of heaven itself, the presence of the angels and the archangels, the place where everything was perfection, and giving everything up to be made nothing? To come as a little baby, not even to come to a palace, but to come to a stable. This is absolutely incredible. And from every point of view, as human beings, it is ridiculous, it isn't logical, it isn't rational, but whoever said it would be? God's ways are not our ways, and God's thoughts are not our thoughts. And the perfect example of that is in his Son. There is no way, if we were God, we'd ever let our Son do what Jesus did, which is one reason we're not God. And the second thing is, it shows us why we do not have the love of God. His love is so incredible and so great and so beyond anything that we know. And that's why his forgiveness is so incredible and so great toward each one of us. Just because he loves us so much. So here is Jesus, who made himself nothing. He took on all the limitations of a human being. He gave up being eternal, infinite, and became finite, mortal, limited in thought, limited in action. He did that. Why? Why would a person do that? Why would God do that? Well, you can only explain it through love. But he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Taking the very nature of a servant. Can you imagine this? He didn't just become a human being, but he became a human being to serve all mankind, to serve mankind in every way possible, to serve mankind to the very end. That in itself takes a little thinking. We're talking about God. We're talking about God himself, coming in the form of a servant, spending time among us, working with us, loving us, caring for us. That is Jesus Christ. And don't forget what we said yesterday. We are to be like him, who being in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man. Now, here we have to get the balance. There's a paradox here for us, but there's also a tension of Christian belief that I find very few people get hold of. And I talked to you about this at Christmas. Let's go back on it again. You see, you have to see Jesus Christ for his 33 years here on earth as totally divine, totally human, and all at the same time. Now you say, just a minute, Richard. No one can be divine and human. I know, but Jesus was. Well, what do you mean? Well, that's exactly what he was. He was human and he was divine. And not once do you find his divinity coming into his humanity, or his humanity spilling over to his divinity. Well, you say, just a minute. How do you know he was just human? Well, he was thirsty. He cried. So he had human weakness, he had human emotions, And you can go right through the whole list of things that happened to Jesus. The second thing is, I see that he was divine. Where? Well, do you remember when Peter worshipped him? Peter fell at his feet and said, "Depart from me, O Lord, I am a sinful man." That is worship. Now, Jesus accepted the worship. You can't accept worship. I can't accept worship. If someone puts us on a pedestal, that's their problem, not ours. But we cannot accept worship. But Jesus did. And Jesus, with his complete truth, his honesty, his integrity, he accepted. Why? Because he knew he was God. And in that moment, as he accepted that worship, his divinity was coming through. Or on another occasion, do you remember 4 men brought their friend to Jesus who was paralyzed? And they let him down through the roof because there was no other way to reach Jesus. Jesus, looking at that man, said, "Son, thy sins be forgiven thee." We can't forgive sins. We can tell a man, a woman, a young person that when they have repented, their sins are forgiven. That's different. Jesus didn't do that. He said, "Son, thy sins are forgiven thee." He forgave the man his sins. That's divine. That's divine. And this was Jesus doing that. So here we find Jesus is human, Jesus is divine, all at the same time. And yet he made himself nothing. He took on the very form of a servant. He was made in human likeness. And I think we forget this. I am absolutely convinced that as Christians, we see Jesus in the manger. We see him for a moment at 12 years of age at his bar mitzvah in Jerusalem. And then we see him at the age 30, beginning his ministry. And we totally forget all the years in between. Jesus was a baby. We sing this, but I'm not sure if we really accept it. Jesus was a baby. He went through all that weakness. He cried as other children cried. I think we get the picture that because he was divine, he didn't cry. No, he was human. He cried. Mary looked after him. Mary did for him what we do to all babies. Then he became a little boy. No, I don't think he had temper tantrums because that's total self. I don't think Jesus was like that. But then he became a teenager. And he went through struggles so that the Bible can say he was tempted in all points like as we are, and yet without sin. Jesus went through all that. And this is great because it means when you kneel down to pray and I kneel down to pray and we chat to Jesus, we chat to a God who understands because he's a God who's been there. He's not a God who's out there, not involved. He's been here. He's taken on the form of a human being. He has gone through the whole thing. This is absolutely marvelous. Therefore, when I pray to the Lord Jesus Christ, I am coming to one who's been where I've been, who suffered as I suffer, who understands exactly what's going on. It's not a distant empathy, it is a compassion because he's been there. Do you understand that? And also get hold of this, Jesus was human. Jesus was not human plus. And I still see, and I still believe, many Christian believers don't see Jesus as just human. Well, yes, but that was Jesus. Well, that was Jesus. Yes, but that was Jesus who was human. The difference was that he had a perfect faith in his Father, and you and I have an imperfect faith. And sometimes we have faith and sometimes we don't have faith. Sometimes we believe exactly what God says and sometimes we vacillate. That's not where Jesus came from. He had that perfect faith, but he was still human, so that when he did his miracles, he did that in his humanity. When he went through his temptations, he went through that in his humanity. He didn't suddenly put in the clutch and change gears and become divine. Because if he had, he wasn't tempted in all points like as we are. He didn't have some escape route every time he was tempted. He didn't have some special course every time he dealt with some miracle of healing. But he did spend time alone with the Father, so that when he came to those situations, he was prepared, he had strength, he had already got ready. And we come to these situations and we're not ready, and we're caught, and we have nothing to say, and we have nothing to give. Why not? Well, we haven't been alone with the Father. We haven't been into the holy place. We haven't spent time with him. Jesus did. And Jesus had a busy life too. If he didn't get there during the day, he got there during the night, but he spent time with the Father. Let's go back to our text. But made himself nothing, taking the very form of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even the death of the cross. He humbled himself. Oh, how he humbled himself. He humbled himself in every way he could, and he even was obedient to die. Why is that significant? He didn't have to die. Jesus didn't have to die. Jesus was perfect. We die because of sins. He had no sins. He could have lived on forever. Why did he die? Because of obedience. And you see, obedience just marks out the life of Jesus all the time. Does it mark your life out? Well, sometimes no. Is there a mark of obedience on you? Are you obedient to God your Father? Are you obedient to his word and all that he's told you? And he's obedient to death, but even the death of the cross. Now you see, here we get the paradox again. He's God and he dies a criminal's death. That was the worst form of torture that man has ever devised for man. And Jesus went and died. Why? Because the Father said that was the way he had to go. And he went that way for one reason and one reason only. It was the only way to get rid of our sin. He had to become a man. He had to be part of the human race so that he could take the human sin and die for it. That's incredible too. He became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. That's our Jesus. We go from humility to humility to humility. Obedience to obedience to obedience. That's the mark of Jesus. And he became a human being so that we could see that it is possible to be obedient. It is possible to be humble because he was. And what Jesus was, we can become. No, I know we don't, but we can. It's a possibility. And it depends how much you and I are totally surrendered to him, that we have that ability. And without that surrender, we don't have that ability. Understand that. And then he dies on a cross. And when he dies on the cross, he sees beyond the cross the glory of being with his Father again. Hear this. It's great.